Google Hangout session today about the foreign policy of the European Union and how it should respond to the new developments in especially United States and United States and Russia. And yeah, I'm Sarah from Europeisk Ungdom Sonneborn, and with us there are the other political officers from the other sections. Yes, so I think we'll just start maybe with a general discussion on how we see the European Union's role globally, how it should respond in certain crises such as Syria or the Ukraine-Russia crisis, and whether it should take an active role in these situations, being united, having a united answer to this, or and how engaged should Europe be as an actor in the global in the international system. I don't know whether I should start now or someone else wants to maybe say something. Okay, I will start then. I think that the EU should try to be more active in global relations, since I think the system became more complex and Europe is surrounded by weak and sort of plenty of chaotic states, and we should really take care of our neighborhood policies and maybe try to be more engaged, in particular in Ukraine right now, in the sense that we should try to have, first of all, I think, calm diplomacy and try to, of course, find non-military solutions, but then also be in the country and support Ukraine and to build a government that's free of corruption, because I think that's one of the main issues in the Ukraine, that there's a high corruption there, and try to be more active there in order to improve the Ukrainian system. And then, of course, we can later on discuss the relations towards Russia and its really aggressive behavior ever since the annexion of Crimea. So. Maybe someone else wants to take over? For instance, Stefan?
Yes, well, I'll be happy to. Can you hear me well, or is it too loud or not loud enough?
I can hear you very well.
Okay. Yes, well, European foreign policy is very tricky, but also something that is very interesting. It is very interesting to me because it is one of the areas that I believe an area, a forum like the European Union should really be prolific. It is an area where scale and scaling up really is beneficial, but it is something that the European Union has had mixed results with. Mark Eystens, Belgian politician, said that Europe is an economic giant, a political dwarf, and a military worm. And he said that long ago, and some things have changed, but not that much. When it comes to spreading capitalism and democracy in Eastern Europe, the European Union has been very successful. When it comes to trade, the European Union is a superpower when it comes to that. But when it comes to anything that has sort of hard power and is involved with hard power, then European Union struggles. It has made some attempts, like the High Representative of what is it called? High Representative of Common Foreign and Security Policy started out with Catherine Ashton, and now we have Federica Mogherini. But it is a position that is only able to act once there's a consensus amongst the governments of the different member states in the EU. So not entirely a very powerful position as of yet, but there is potential for growth there. And I think with the Lisbon Treaty, the European Union also gained a military component, sort of. There's these different European battle groups that have not really been used, but there's also some sort of common security pledge, I believe. So that has some security implications. Then there's a sort of second pillar to European security. There's the overall NATO, and then beyond that and within that there's the EU one. Regarding the current crises in Syria and in Ukraine, I do not really have any. Those are really tricky issues. I do not really have any concrete positions on those, but I would like to discuss them with you further into this hangout.
Yeah, I think maybe we could start talking about, because I think soon the EU will decide whether they should extend the sanctions on Russia, and whether they've been a useful tool or not. In my opinion, they have been very helpful in order to get Russia to where it is right now, that they were able to agree on the Minsk agreements, and as long as they are not fully implemented, that they should keep the sanctions towards Russia. Yeah, maybe Joachim, you want to tell us about your position on Russia, and of course, the approach of EU's foreign policy.
Well, thank you. I will try. The thing, as I see it as a normal Dane, is that every time we hear about the European foreign policy is taken about as serious as when we hear the results from different think tanks. So it's like this think tank had found out that it's dangerous to poke Putin because he will poke back at some point, and the European foreign ministers have found out the same thing. It follows the same thought. So the thing is that for me it's very hard to find out how to take them more serious when you never see results of what they do. So if we were to put in more sanctions toward Russia, then it should be displayed more openly what is the consequences of these sanctions, for example. If we should get into affecting Syria, it will also be mainly from a trade point of view, because we don't really share borders with them at the moment. So for me, it's like EU foreign policy is a very interesting field. The only problem is that the effort and the results are rarely correlated. So what should we do about Russia? Well, we should keep up trying to put in new trading sanctions on them to make them kind of fall back in line, because we are the biggest economy in the world, so they will need us at some point when China says they don't want their gas anymore, for example. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you for your position. And I think now Narcissus wants to talk about his thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Well, you have to look at Putin as a lion master in a way. Imagine that until now, all that he did, the Georgia invasion, the Ukraine invasion, has been in order to appeal the public, in order to maintain his grip on power, because next to Putin, there's 40 other aspirants to power, which are way worse than he is, actually. So right now, considering that, I mean, you have to understand the Russian population is quite resistant to no matter how many sanctions we're going to put, no matter how hard we're going to hit their economy. So they're not afraid of that. If you feed them with pride, they will accept to go hungry for quite a long time. I mean, if you think about their contribution to the Second World War, they were sending one soldier with bullets and one soldier with a gun. So they were thinking one of them will die and probably the other one will pick up from the other one, but at least both participate in the fight. So that's what's always there. They have enough people to go around, and they're not afraid to sacrifice for pride, for believing in something. So I don't think sanctions on Russia will work right now. I think military action on Russia will work right now, because what we have right now is that we have to realize he's waiting for the third target, and that could be anywhere from Estonia to Romania. Like he said that in 3 days he can take all the Eastern Europe back. That was all my point. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. That was really interesting. I think that Putin is really, really hard to analyze or to predict any of his actions. I think he has kind of changed from this, or maybe he hasn't changed, maybe he's been like this before, but being more pragmatist and now being more about ideology, or since this inaction of Crimea and the Russian ethnic minorities in Ukraine in order to maintain his influence in this country and generally in Eastern Europe. And of course, it's really hard to predict what Russia will do, but in a sense, I have to agree that I think Putin's action are to a large degree also for his maintain popularity in his own country and to get domestic support, which he has basically achieved through these actions in Ukraine, but also in Syria, just basically being present for quite a rather short time in Syria, and then surprising the West with his actions, changing the course of the war in Syria, which has given him, I think, a lot of domestic popularity. And the thing is, how should EU handle this? I don't really see military actions as a solution, which is also, of course, not EU's objective, since it's not. It has more of like humanitarian actions or joint actions rather than military actions, of course, since it doesn't even have its own army. But it is military presence is more of the responsible for NATO in the case of Ukraine, especially. Maybe someone else wants to give another comment on this. Nazis.
Okay, thank you. Well, I have one more thing, is that we have to understand that what Putin is doing is a divide and conquer strategy. Because you have to look at all his funding of nationalist parties in Europe. That's one fact. Two, increased spying activity. Just in the last week, at least 4 spies have been discovered in Spain, of living there for 20 years as sleeper agents. And then again, look at the Russian hooligans in France. It seems that they send their properly trained fighters as hooligans in France. I mean, it seems like he's just trying to taunt us. I mean, that's all I have to say on Putin before I get more angry.
I agree that it makes it particularly hard to have good relations with Russia, and there are some people even talking about a second Cold War occurring. Although it's, I think right now, rather an issue between EU and Russia. Okay, maybe Stefan, you want to talk next?
Yes, thank you. I would like to elaborate my position later, but I would just quickly pose a question to Narcissus. Do you think that they, or it seemed to, the implication was that the hooligans the Russian hooligans in France are not really Russian football fans, but really just essentially military personnel sent by Putin in guise of being football fans. So, do you think? I mean, it seems a bit far-fetched, but do you think that is what has happened?
Just to answer to your question, well, I don't think they're military personnel. I just think they are very well trained in combat, in fighting, like fighting without guns, just bare hand fighting. Because the English fans say that they, in all their fighting in England, and they're used to it every freaking week, they never met such well prepared people in fighting. That's what I base my conclusion on.
Yeah, I think that we can't really connect it to Putin himself, but I think it's been really organized criminal actions that are just showing Russian nationalism. However, we could also see British and French and German hooligans, and I think that this is also, I think in football often nationalism is quite a big issue, but yeah, of course, I have to agree with both of you. So, shall we? Anyone else wants to talk more about the sanctions? Just, I mean, generally, I think that EU has used these sanctions in the past for quite reasonable strategy, as it's since it has been able to negotiate the Minsk agreements, and that we should continue to work close with the Ukraine government. And also, how would you approach the issue of corruption in Ukraine? I think that it's really essential to build up good government in Ukraine in order to be able to have this as a basis as a like position to negotiate or to handle Russia. Maybe Joachim?
How would I handle corruption? That's a very interesting question, because if we can ask that, then we can also solve some problems in Africa afterwards. Mm-hmm. But the thing is that in order to have less corruption, and there is no country in the world where there is no corruption, is to raise the living standard of the given country. For example, you see less corruption in Denmark than you do in, for example, Sierra Leone, where you want to go, because the living standard is higher, so there's not that much to gain from saying, okay, yeah, I will take 1,000 crowns for you to give you more, to give you a quicker space in the queue for unemployment benefits. But the thing is, in Ukraine, to be able to raise the living standard would be to kind of send money into the country and at the same time have oversight over how these money are spent. Otherwise, they would just be used for some, corruptive agents again. So the thing is that then you would have to sit watchers in like you did in Kosovo afterwards, that you did in Iraq afterwards, and still those overwatchers went to be corrupt again. So I'm not sure how to solve the corruption, but I think heightening the living standard for the people would go a long way.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I actually pretty much agree with you, and maybe we could go on with, unless anyone else wants to talk a bit more about Russia or Putin or Ukraine, we could go on with maybe the other big player in the current debate, which is Donald Trump and his foreign policy plans, which seem to have, if he's elected in office, would have quite a big impact on Europe or the nations in NATO, since he's highly criticized. He's a bit, he's criticizing NATO and being more of his America First policy is pretty much not satisfied with the current situation of NATO, since he's arguing that US is paying way too much, and he wants member states to sort of pay for the American safety. Otherwise, he's not willing to be part of NATO, or to be present in the sense they are right now. So, Stefan, you want to go first on this topic?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, I think it is to the impediment of both Europe and the United States that the security, that North Atlantic security is as asymmetrical and one-sided as it is today, because the European countries have really been free-riding on American taxpayers with their defense budget that has been bloated to accommodate defense needs for two continents, essentially. And I think it means that the Americans often complain that the Europeans need to pay more, they need to increase their defense spending, but we are not going to do so because we know that we feel that we have outsourced our defense to the United States. And I think if the transatlantic partnership is to function well, we might be so drastic as to, or the Americans might have to either lower their defense spending so that the Europeans will be forced to spend more, or the Americans might have to do as Trump suggests, leave NATO. It might be a blessing in disguise in the way that if they do that, the transatlantic partnership might become, I'm not saying this is certain, but it might become more functional. It might be that, okay, now the Europeans realize they're on their own. If somebody invades them, they need to increase their defense spending, and it will also make the Europeans much better partners to the Americans when it comes to humanitarian missions, when it comes to world peace. Take our intervention in Libya, for instance. It was something that was in Europe's backyard, but the Europeans could not probably do this because of logistics. We did not have refuel planes, we did not have the proper supply lines or logistics to do this. We needed the Americans. The Americans could supply the European military machine from across an ocean, something that Europe could not do itself with something that was in its own backyard. That is really bad. If ever the Americans choose to, in a crisis where Europe is in a crisis, to leave us, then we are going to be in big trouble. I think we should prepare ourselves for the day that the Americans are not willing to help us, because otherwise our safety and our security is not at all in our own hands. So this might actually be a benefit, even though it looks like something that is going to be a detriment.
All right. Narcissus has a comment on this.
So, Stefan, if I understand well, what you're proposing is more investment in EU military, right?
Yes, either in more I mean, you could do something alternatively. You could do a very centralized military coordination across European countries, because there's a lot of waste going on in European defense budgets for duplication. I think it's estimated that we could have the same military strength as we do now for half the price if military spending was decided at a European level, which is really logical, because if you have like a bunch of if you're a small country and you're going to buy a navy, then of course you'll buy a small ship. But then if you have 28 small navies, then you're going to have hundreds of small ships, whereas you really ought to have some aircraft carriers and some other stuff. But there's no one country that is capable of having that on its own. So there would be some benefit in coordinating defense spending. But if we're not going to do that, then yeah, we're going to have to spend a lot more. I think so.
All right, now that was interesting. I will agree that with the fact that America's incentive to actually maintain the structure of NATO as it is right now is probably way less apparent than it used to be, since the threats have changed, or the threats towards the US have changed. Russia's not as a threat anymore as it maybe used to be. There are other actors in the system, and that in January I think it's also not a really good idea to rely on the US in order to protect EU or European security. On the other hand, I'm not quite sure how capable the EU would be to have a common military presence in the world, since it's quite still really national issue, and how to realize this, maybe Stefan could elaborate on this.
Yes, well, I think maybe in the long run, I mean, in 100 years or so, then it might be a common European army might be feasible. But I think in the short run, the short term, the best we can really do is just to coordinate defense spending. So if a group of countries buy the same plane, buy the same things, and sort of coordinate, okay, we need this much, then there will be a disincentive for each country to, and if there's a common European decided, if there's a defense level of defense spending that is decided at European level, then there's not going to be a race to the bottom incentive as there currently is, where we just spend as little as possible because we know there's a bunch of countries in NATO that are going to have our backs if something happens. And then you will also, if countries buy a lot of the same things at the same time, then you are going to have then you're going to have them at a cheaper price, just like in real life when you buy something at a surplus. So if you buy a large volume, I think that is what is probably going to need to happen in the short term. I think an actual EU army is not really feasible. I think we already have these EU battle groups, which are composed of national divisions. We haven't used those yet, but until we use those and see how efficient they actually are, I'm not really sure how good an EU army would be. There's also a language barrier, but if in the future, if all Europeans speak English, then we'll have a solution to that problem.
Okay, thank you. That was really nice to hear some concrete ideas about how to coordinate. And now Joachim has another comment.
Yes. First of all, I don't think we should have a European army unless we decide to go into being a federation, because an army is a symbol of a nation's identity. So it's kind of, if you're not able to defend yourself, then you kind of need to depend on others. So try to think about Denmark relying on Germany to come to its defenses, and then Norway would choose to invade Denmark. Then it would be like a little too much waiting time to get the defense up. Another thing is, I'm completely in agreement with Stefan that we need to figure out how to coordinate our defense spending with other countries, though, so that we don't just buy the same thing as Norway and Sweden, so we end up having triple the amount we need. There needs to be some kind of an idea about, well, we are here, we can help each other, but we shouldn't just push each other to be totally reliant on us. And if the US choose to go out of NATO, then I would strongly disagree with the idea about military action against Russia. Because look at history. Europe has not been able to defend itself for almost 200 years. Every time something happened, we have been saved by the Americans. That's actually since the start of the 1900. So I think it's a dangerous proposition to say that it will be a blessing in disguise unless that we actually figure out a way to take care of ourselves. Because the biggest enemy Europe has is Europe itself. Because when we start fighting among ourselves, that's when we kind of lose control of the battles. Yeah. So coordinated defense spending at some point.
I think I completely agree with you that, of course, Europe has been really busy to actually achieve peace within Europe, and this was also, of course, one of the main reasons why all the NATO and why this has all been created in the first place. However, I want to ask basically two questions, since we've mentioned Libya. And first, what do you think, how much intervention in other countries is actually necessary, or how much should the EU intervene, or European nations? And then second, on how much intervention could a common European approach actually agree on, since we have, if we take the most dramatic case, the Iraq invasion in 2003, which kind of split the Europe, particular the UK, that was of course in favor of this invasion, and then the majority actually being against it. And then in the end we could see that the result was, of course, very, very, very negative. That there was no sense in trying to create democracies by intervening with the society or the government. And yeah, this is of course two major questions. First of all, that's whether democratic peace is actually working, and I think that from a really realist perspective, I think that it's not that EU shouldn't go the road that, of course, we are defending democracy and we promote democracy, but not in a sense. I think it is not possible to sort of create democracies abroad, which is not coming from domestic, when the society or the domestic structure is not ready for democracy yet. So of course these are really major questions, but I think it's important that we clarify on how Europe should approach this whole issue. Who would like to go first on this topic? Otherwise, I could still keep talking about how I think it's not really working to spread democracy, since, well, I think that we could see that, especially in like the democratization phases, there's really high risk of nationalist elites maintaining their power, or start worrying, of course, about the positions they had before the democratization process, and then of course quite often it's actually conflict that results out of it. And in Iraq we could see how this actually produced the later on today's terrorism that we are mostly worried about. Stefan, you have a comment?
Yes, I think the notion that we can create democracies out of thin air abroad in third world countries is something that I agree with you. It doesn't seem to be working, but I think it's because I think some of the biggest mistakes were, of course, done in the Bush administration. I think in that administration there was a sort of belief that what had been done with Germany and Japan after the Second World War could be done in other countries. They expected that once they had freed Iraq from Saddam Hussein, that they would be greeted as liberators. While that was not really the case, the thing that I sort of noticed is that the comparison between Germany and Japan and then these new attempts at spreading democracy are very different. Like, if you see the first time you tried democracy in Germany, it pretty much failed pretty quickly, which is pretty much what we're seeing now with all these different countries, Egypt amongst one of them, the new examples. And then after that attempt, then after a sort of a transition, a good transition period, then you had a good stable democracy. Same thing with Japan. Before Japan became a democracy, before the Second World War, because before the First World War, Western powers had helped Japan create a sort of westernized governmental structure. And it's in political science, it is often mentioned, it is not about the type of government, it's about the degree of government. You need a stable government with the rule of law and with very little corruption, and that is what works. That is what we've seen in Taiwan. That's what we've seen in South Korea. If you have some sort of intermediate state, some sort of autocracy, but an autocracy that works and has a stable government, then eventually it will, as the population becomes richer and more informed, more educated, they will demand more authority. And I think what we've done in the Middle East, going from a dictatorship, a tyranny, a despotism, to a democracy without some form of intermediary regime, has been a great mistake. I think we need, for the immediate time being, some form of autocrats in these countries, and then 20 years from now, then maybe they might develop into democracies.
Yeah, I really completely agree with you that this is really dangerous to create these sort of incomplete democracies that haven't created any stable institutions or anything yet. So, of course, the population won't be ready for this, and the nationalists, whatever dangerous groups, may end up creating great chaos. And then, of course, you could also create your own enemies through these interventions, as we see with ISIS right now, which basically in the very roots are the results of the Western actions in the Middle East. So I think we can agree on this approach. Maybe we could. I think another really big issue would be maybe not so much. well, actually, I guess the issue of nuclear weapons and maybe particularly the deal with Iran and how we would maybe sort of evaluate this deal. Has anyone any particular opinion on this deal that has been made? I think that we are probably, or the EU is probably the same, that everyone is aiming for a nuclear, a world free of nuclear weapons. But then again, as long as enemies have these weapons, everyone else will keep them as well. Trump is another criticizer of this deal with Iran, and which would of course be another. I guess when he's elected, this deal would be stopped in a sense. But first of all, right now it's that they have lifted sanctions from Iran and that they are able to control their nuclear, or they intend to be able to control the actions in Iran. I think, Narcissus wants to say something about this.
Yes, regarding Iran, we have to realize that EU, Federica Mogherini, she was one of the main players who created this deal in first place. So if Trump and if the Congress, the Republicans are by any chance, even though, well, there's two things here. One, Trump might get elected, but two, the Congress, the next Congress that will be a Bernie Sanders Congress. So wherever Trump gets elected, he will only be able to do Congress. I can guarantee you that will be completely against him. So he will be, in a way, half-cocked. He will not be fully loaded in his power to do stuff, stupid stuff, most likely. If they deny the action with Iran, which Israel will be so goddamn happy, then we have to realize that they will probably go out of the NATO as well. And if NATO crumbles, then we as European Union have to change a bit from being a soft power to maybe more mixed power, a bit of hard power having there, because we're going to have to assert ourselves as the global superpower. Because if you cannot have Russia and you cannot have USA, then it's up to us to be, in a way, the police of the world. And we will not let a deal with Iran, and Iran would be more than happy, I think, to maintain a deal with Europe, with the European Union, in exchange for them not developing nuclear weapons. That was all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your comment, and I basically agree with it. Yeah, maybe we could again talk about NATO in the sense to about extension and how far NATO should gain more member states, and how Russia perceives these actions. Obviously, how provoking would these actions be? Anyone? Yeah, Stefan.
Yes, just initially, I want to do some housekeeping about what I said before. I think even if the United States chooses to leave NATO, I think they're still going to be our partners, they're still going to be our friends, and they're still going to help us if we get attacked. The thing is that binding this musketeer agreement, the binding that they have to help us if we are with it, I think that is toxic to the alliance. I think if they leave, then it's going to be on a voluntary basis and they're going to do it, but we are going to prepare in the case that they don't. That's just my point. Is when it comes to NATO extension, well, really just I don't have any prejudices as such in when it comes to defense cooperation. I think any country that might want to join this, if they follow the rules, if they're stable. I mean, if Russia was a country that followed the rules and they were good partners and they were if we could count on them when things got a bit hot, then I would be all in favor of Russia joining NATO if they wanted to. I would have no problem with that. So really, just countries that are able to be reasoned with, and countries that are cooperative, and countries that have similar security issues as we do, I would think should be eligible to join.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Well, then I think we could go on with the, I don't know, maybe in the sense of, we've talked about it before when we talked about European identity, but another actor is, of course, Turkey, and maybe EU's relation towards Turkey. We could discuss this topic again in the terms of the refugee crisis and the deal that has been made. I don't know whether we should approach this topic again, but I think that there's been really tensions in the recent days. And yeah, maybe Natsis, you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. Well, you talked about Turkey. Basically, when you say Turkey, you say second military power in NATO. But if you think that if US goes out of NATO, and automatically Turkey will follow, there's no discussion about it. So therefore, NATO will not exist anymore. So basically, you can think like this. First, it crumbled the Soviet Union and their alliance, military alliance that crumbled. Okay. So a vestige of the Second World War is NATO. NATO, it's from 1950s. It's not 2016 anymore. So in a way, it's kind of normal if NATO also goes away, because that will just leave space for new alliances to be made. Especially if Trump gets elected in US, that means Russia and US will work again like they were working in the 1990s, in that period when Boris Yeltsin was in power in Russia. So you're going to have US and Russia working together for their own common interests, for the good of their countries, and we, Europe, are going to have to work for the good of Europe. Because in foreign policy, you have to think of yourself and not of the others in the world. That's how it works in foreign policy. You need to think of your interest, of your people's interests first. That's how the people in military think. That's usually the typical mentality. So when we went to Libya, for example, we didn't go there to make it more democratic because we are so nice and good. We went there because we want and we need that place to be peaceful in order to our borders, our southern borders, to be peaceful. So it doesn't really matter how much intervention is there we should have. It matters that place is peaceful. That's all should be counting for us. As long as there's no war on the borders of the Europe, then all should be fine. So that should be the main role of the future EU army, to maintain peace on the borders of the EU. And if any other country wants to join some kind of military protection under the EU, like Georgia, or from a country that perceives itself as an enemy, then we should be more than glad to offer it. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So this was one of our more realist approaches, I think, towards politics, which I basically agree on, that first of all, everyone has their own interests in mind. I don't know. However, I think that maybe in the world, Europe should still be active, not in the sense to just invade another country or go to another country and say, hey, let's have democracy right now, but more in the sense that we have these I don't know, every country there's an EU office, of course, and then they observe what's going on in a country, but then again I feel like we should also see opportunities to develop or take opportunities when they're given in working closely together with the societies in other countries outside the EU, since I know that there are probably many societies that or parts of society that would love some more support for their I think forward-thinking ideas, and in this sense we should EU should still be active in the non-military way in general now, but yeah. Nastas has no comment.
Well, basically, if there is a group in a country that's not democratic, that wishes to be democratic, regardless if they're majority or not, and they have support from us, we should give it, because we are champions of democracy. And therefore, if there's one group in Belarus who asks, help us to make this country democratic, regardless that will become the future elite and the future ruling class, it will be in our interest to help them, regardless in which way and how. And especially if we help locals start the process, then that's even better. It's the same what we do in Jeff, where every summer we train people in Moldova from Belarus on how to start a revolution, because we need Belarus to become a democracy. We cannot have Europe 2016 with a country which is not a democracy. We have people, European people, in the continent of Europe who live under a dictatorship. That's not okay for this year. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Maybe we could since you had the Brexit event the last time, or we already had like a Brexit talk about it. Stefan, you want to say something? Or?
Yes, I just wanted to quickly say that I completely agree with the Nazis. I think we should. It is in our interest to, and this sounds very imperialist of me to say, but I think we should try and have as many satellite states and puppet regimes all around the world as we possibly can. I mean, and emulate the United States in this way, because I think that is, if we are going to create a peaceful world, then there needs to be some kind of leadership, and I think that leadership should be of the Western countries. And if that does not exist, then many of these countries are going to be left by their own devices, and there are going to be some very harmful regimes existing. And so yeah, I just a quick comment there.
Okay, thank you. So far we've talked a lot about the actors outside EU, and I think that we should also maybe approach the issue of the main actors inside, which are Germany and France and UK. And we can see, of course, France always has its own will, I guess, in its foreign policy, as well as the UK. Both are really protective, I think, of their own national security, and also more active in military interventions. And maybe we could talk a little bit about France, and then of course, and what if UK decides to leave the EU in about 1 week, and how this then affect the EU. Maybe Joachim, you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I can. the thing is that I think even if Great Britain choose to leave the European Union, they will still continue to function as a NATO member. So it will not really have anything. It might collect some bad will in the council and stuff. But as a player in NATO, it will not really affect them because they are one of the major players. In the case that they one of the few states who actually have atomic weapons. France would jump at the chance of the US going out of NATO because they have kind of wanted it to be that way for a long time so they could get even closer in Europe. And Germany is probably looking into what is best for Germany. So for me, it's like if NATO is going to be without Turkey, without the US, then I think that it will pull the rest closer together in the case of the Central European bloc. In case of Trump staying in and destroying everything in NATO because he's just that type of person who would like to stay in and be disruptive, then I think we would see a very annoyed council meetings with France and Germany. So the thing is that even though we would like to say that everything is going to be bad if Trump gets elected as president, we actually don't know. So it's the same with the trade, our TTIP agreement. If Trump gets elected as president, he cannot really just toss it out the window because it's already in the making. It's a theory called path dependency, that sometimes you're set on a path you cannot really change because it has been going this way for a long time. So I think we will have to watch and learn for the next couple of months. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. And I think we have now really talked about a wide range of topics. Of course, not really in depth, but at least we gave everyone slightly quite a good overview of what issues are there. And I think we can close this debate now. Maybe, well, everyone who has some comments can give a comment. Me personally, I think that we had some good aspects in the sense that that EU should definitely keep a strong voice in the international system, be prepared for a Trump presidency, which I think is also maybe in the sense good for Europe to sort of realize that they should make themselves less dependent on American security actions, American military, and also in a sense towards Russia. I think we should also try to make ourselves less dependent on their energy supplies, and try to sort of improve relations towards Russia and with a calm diplomacy. And yeah, I think that's pretty much important. And I think another important aspect that we have all agreed on is that we are not going, that you should not be this sense the peace and democracy in the sense to promote these, of course, promote these values, but not more in the pressing way that it is forced on anyone. So you have to be a bit of a realist in this sense, and not, of course, we defend these values, but it should be reasonable and made in a rational manner. I think this is an important aspect that we all agreed on today, and that should be somehow involved in EU policies. That I think is important. Yeah, Narcissus has also a last concluding comment.
Well, I would like to thank you all for a really good discussion, and for you, Sarah, for being a very good moderator tonight. What I would like to say is simple. Putin is playing a game of chess with us. It's a strategic chess on the geopolitical board. And unfortunately, on our side, it's an empty chair. We don't have anyone or any capabilities of geopolitical strategy or anyone hired for such a task. So basically, we have on one side a player, we have the board, which is basically Europe. That's what we are playing chess on. And we have one player who takes every round, and then we have no player on the other side. So until we come to that board and we have a proper player who can match Putin on the geopolitical board, until then we cannot wish to stop their ambitions and to impose our interests. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.